Hello Zero Books readers. In this video, we'll take excerpts from Mark Fisher's books, Capitalist Realism and Ghosts of My Life, as we rewind. Not to the beginning of 2018, but rather arbitrarily back to the 1970s. We'll do this not only because I was born in December of 1970, and this is a time of year when I traditionally look back over my own life, but because, in many ways, we are only now beginning to leave the epoch that started in the 70s behind. We'll rewind because we're turning a corner in history blindly. We're being drawn into a new phase of capitalism without understanding where we've been. According to the Western Marxist philosopher Moishe Postone, starting in the late 1960s and early 70s, there emerged what, in his book Time, Labor, and Social Domination, he called a crisis in Marxism. The crisis was not only a response to the failures of really existing socialism, but indicated that there was, quote, a deep uncertainty regarding the essential nature of capitalism and what overcoming it could mean. The dogmatism of many New Left groups in the late 1960s and early 1970s, and the many contemporary postmodern positions, can be seen as expressions of such uncertainty about the nature of capitalist society and even of a turning away from the very attempt to grasp it. This uncertainty can be understood in part as an expression of a basic failure of the traditional Marxist approach. It has become clear that the traditional Marxist theoretical paradigm does not provide a satisfactory conception of the nature of capitalism itself, one that grounds an adequate analysis of the changing conditions of capitalism and grasps its fundamental structures in a way that points to the possibility of their historical transformation. The transformation implied by traditional Marxism is no longer plausible as a solution to the ills of modern society. In his book, Postone advocates for a new understanding of Marx, one in which Marx is no longer interpreted as calling for the seizure of power by the working class, but rather for the self-abolition of the working class. It was Postone's contention that without such a movement built on this understanding of Marx, the left, such as it is, would stagnate. I agree, and I would add that when the left stagnates, the only remaining force for change in society is capitalism itself. But capitalism is in contradiction with itself. Capitalism both changes everything and always remains the same. From this perspective, we can see that when we mark the passage of time each New Year's Eve, we are always celebrating both what has changed and what has remained the same. In his book, Capitalist Realism, Mark Fisher quotes Frederick Jameson's description of what he and Jameson would describe as postmodernism, but of what I think should be understood as a description of our predicament in this post-Marxist moment. Jameson wrote that, "No society has ever been as standardized as this one. The stream of human, social, and historical temporality has never flowed quite so homogeneously. What we now begin to feel is that despite everything submitting itself to a perpetual change in fashion, that nothing can actually change at all." The reason for this sensation that we're standing still in a cyclone, the reason that Fisher, in his book Ghosts of My Life, described how he was surrounded by early 21st century cultural products that could have been retrieved from a time capsule buried in the 70s, has to do with the dual nature of time under capitalism.
For those of you familiar with Foucault, I'm suggesting that Marx's notion of abstract domination is actually a more rigorous and determinate analysis of what Foucault attempted to grasp with his notion of power in the modern world. Moreover, the form of domination Marx analyzes is not only cellular and spatial, as in Foucault, but also processual and temporal. The peculiar treadmill dynamic that I've outlined is generative of an extremely complex, nonlinear historical dynamic that marks capitalist society. On the one hand, it's characterized by ongoing, even accelerating, transformations of production and of social life. On the other hand, this historical dynamic entails the ongoing reconstitution of its own fundamental condition as an unchanging feature of social life, namely, that value is reconstituted, that social mediation ultimately remains affected by labor, and that living labor remains integral to the total social process of production, regardless of the level of productivity. So the historical dynamic of capitalism, and I think usually people get only one side, ceaselessly generates what is the same while always generating what is new.
The world we're living in, or to put it better, the time we're living through, has, as Postone points out, a dual nature. On the one hand, we're living in a time of constant cultural and material change. Our collective life isn't rooted in a given community, in a given identity. Old norms and values are consistently destroyed and replaced. We are always on the move. On the other hand, the system that perpetuates these changes is abstract and universal. It doesn't change and has not changed. We are both too firmly rooted in this world and in a constant state of flux and disorientation. The reason we are living through a time defined by the worst of both the modern and the traditional is that we've created a system wherein the fundamental meaning, the true aim, is inhuman and abstract, even as it's immanent. Meanwhile, our particular finite and material existence has become peripheral, inconsequential, and infinitely plastic. We are dominated by what Marx called the value form. The production of commodities and the exploitation of labor is the tradition that maintains itself from one generation to the next. While human values and meaning are in such a constant state of flux that it seems impossible to decisively act in our own interest, as we can't know, or even really guess at, what we'll want from one day to the next.
LILYSHRIMP! Last week I asked you nothing! Welcome everyone to LILYSHRIMP, my favorite show. Yay! Fan voted top show of 2018. It's been
Reaching back into the past, repeating old cultural forms, is one response to this dilemma. It is a way to create at least the semblance of ground, to put on a show of authenticity. Another solution is to abandon self-directed activity altogether and submit to the abstraction that rules over our lives.
Showing their viewers that it's okay to go through tough times like that.
It takes a lot of bravery to be that vulnerable, and I'm so proud of this community.
In his book, Time, Labor, and Social Domination, Postone describes our situation this way. Individuals and groups, no longer autonomous, are subordinated to the whole because of their productivity. People are treated as means rather than ends in themselves. This is veiled, however, for they are compensated for their loss of independence by the socially sanctioned transgression of some earlier social norms, especially sexual ones. By breaking down the wall separating the intimate sphere from society and the state, such compensation allows for further social manipulation. However, neither nostalgia for old traditions nor a submission to life in flux, to a life dominated by capitalist value, will overcome our dilemma. Change, if it is to come, will require a sacrifice of both the irresponsibility of the drifter, who is moved with the flow of capitalist society, and the certainty of the nostalgic reactionary, who grasps after supposedly transhistorical norms. Instead, we must find opportunities within this world to realize the seeming freedom that our personal indeterminacy grants us. The moment of revolution, if it comes, will be the moment when our emancipation puts us in the driver's seat.
So guys, apparently we control Rewind this year. Y'all, we can do whatever we want. what do we do?
Thanks for watching this Zero Books video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to this channel and click on the notifications bell so that you'll be alerted whenever we release a new video. You should also consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons get access to our Inside Zero Books podcast every week and can get access to the Zero Books Book Club and help us to continue making online content from the left.